You know?
Okay, I'll go sit down now. Thanks. That wasn't helping me. One of the things that's disturbed me the most about the dialogue around the Constitutional Convention is how often people who are sort of joining in with the perspective that this is a dangerous time and therefore we shouldn't move to do what I've read a lot about the Constitutional Convention and what it is and why it's actually it was put in our Constitution to give the people a democratic process of workaround if their government does become captured by corruption. So the whole idea is only available to us every 20 years because the assumption is in 20 years it's quite possible that your government could get controlled in such a way that it's not representative of the people. So I love the idea. In fact, many scholars around the world have recognized the innovation of the Constitutional Convention as being a tremendous one in America. But a lot of the argument against it seems to me, for what I've seen, based on, well, we know it's based on fear, but the primary source of the fear seems to be, look what happened, we have Trump in office, therefore democracy is kind of screwed up, this is not a good time for democracy. I think that's a terrible argument. I think that this is precisely the time when New York needs to do what California tries to do, which is to create protections within its own state that makes the people of that state safe from, for example, from the kind of stripping of protections that we see at the federal level. So, for example, California has moved to create more environmental Bill of Rights issues that give the people of California, by definition, access to safe drinking water and air. At least it puts it in the Constitution. We can do that in New York. Now, a legislature would never have agreed to the protections we have for pensions, for the Forever Wild provision for the state parks. Those we only got them through previous constitutional conventions. Only by bypassing a corrupt government have we ever achieved the very things that we're being told are threatened by having another one. And that worries me. I think this is a great time for democracy. I think this is just the time when we need to democratically, within the state of New York, create protections that ensure that the federal government, we have a limit on what the federal government can do to hurt New Yorkers. That's fine. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Kornfeld. Like David, I was a founding member of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. I was active with the organization for a number of years, and I appreciate the fact that they supported me in 2 bids for elective office. However, in recent years, I've grown very disenchanted with the LIPC. One of the reasons is what we're hearing here tonight, the fear-mongering about this Constitutional Convention. Similar things were done by other progressive organizations, not the LIPC, back in 1980. When a number of us who ran for delegate to the White House, to the then 1980 White House Conference on Families, were told, you have no chance of winning. The State Right to Life Party had just come into being, and they're going to run this whole convention. Well, guess what? This 20-year-old college student at Stony Brook at the time won overwhelmingly a delegate seat, along with a whole slate of progressives. The fear-mongers then were wrong. I believe they're going to be wrong this time. But there's another thing that really concerns me. We've heard it said about the Mercers and the Bannons and all that, who aren't involved in this, to the extent that I know of at least yet. But nothing has been said about the real moneyed special interests who are all backing the idea that we should oppose this. It's the establishment political parties that are opposed to a convention for obvious reasons. They want to protect the status quo. And it's the moneyed special interests. And when I say moneyed special interests, I'm not just talking about the business interests. In fact, I'm not primarily talking in this case, strangely enough, about that. I'm talking about the public sector unions. They are moneyed special interests, and they do not always stand up for their own members. Case in point, I know several teachers, including one former teachers union leader, who are actively opposed by the teachers union when they ran for office against right-wing Republican incumbents. And what they were told was, we appreciate that you stand for all our issues, we appreciate you're a member of our union, but you're not going to win. We have to support the incumbent and hope that he or she will change. That's the same thing that's happening now. The Long Island Progressive Coalition is so tied to the unions that they can't see beyond that. And I am very pro-labor. As David knows, I worked for a leading left-wing member of the British Labour Party a number of years ago. I still hold the same views that he had then. He's long since passed. We don't have a labor movement here, anything like the labor movement in Europe, or anything like it used to be years ago here. Where are the Cesar Chavez's and the William Wimpesingers? They're not around. This is more of a Gompers-like labor movement, and I don't see labor as being necessarily progressive. Individuals may be, individual leaders may be, but in general, I don't see it, I just don't see it that way. But the main thing is, I'm really concerned about this fear, and I'm really concerned about what I see as an anti-democratic, with a small d attitude, we don't trust the people. If progressives are going to say we don't trust the people, then damn it, don't label me, then I don't know if I want to be considered a progressive. And by the way, there are issues on which progressives and conservatives of goodwill and libertarians of goodwill can agree. I think I speak to a lot of people who are much more conservative than me when it comes to structural reforms, the idea of opening up the political process to more people, the idea of making it less difficult, not more difficult, for mavericks within the established political parties and true independents to get on the ballot. And they tend to agree with me. I don't know why we always have to make it us versus them. I wish we would try to understand that there are areas where we can agree, areas where we can agree to respectfully disagree, but understand that the main thing that could come out of this convention, and I don't have a crystal ball, and I do not think the Constitutional Convention is the panacea for all our problems, but if we can try to get some real structural reform and get more people involved, I think that's a good thing, and I don't think we should be so frightened about it. Donald Trump did not win New York State. Thanks.
He won Suffolk County. But let me say a couple of things here, because I mean, if you can speak forcefully about that, you can say what you'd like to have, but there's a political reality. Now, we have a very progressive city council in New York City. And that's a progressive city council, with the majority being absolutely progressive, and that's because of public financing of elections. And de Blasio was elected public financing elections. I think the best mayor we've ever had in the city of New York. We can go talk about the details of that. Is he perfect? No, but he's done fantastic things, such as the universal pre-K, for example, such as the expansion of affordable housing. It's not easy to get affordable housing in any case, and it's certainly very difficult to get affordable housing for people who only earn $20,000 a year. You have to finance that, and then you've got a governor who is seeking to undercut him in every way. But how did that come about? It came about because of public financing of elections. Public financing of elections, which was created, sustained, and led by my organization, Citizen Action, right? And we had to make a corrupt deal, you might say, to get that done. All right? We endorsed a very conservative Democratic candidate for governor in 1998 on the condition that he would support public financing of elections. And we got it done. And that changed the political climate in New York City to the extent to which that there is a lot of powerful interests that are profoundly upset. The real estate lobby, among others, Wall Street, to the existence of public financing. Now, there's a lot of issues that are going on that we are very much organized in a serious political way to use political power to try and make significant changes. For example, such as to take Cuomo's vision of complete renewable energy for the state of New York and to turn it into legislation which is enforceable. And there's a major statewide campaign going on now with increasing support about the possibility of precisely that, the New York Renews campaign. Right? This is serious political organizing around a very, very important issue having to do with global warming. Right? Not some pie-in-the-sky thing of what you'd like to have, but how you're going to make a change and what kind of pressure can be brought to make that happen. Right? So it's extremely important. It's a question of how you take seriously electoral politics, or whether you think that, well, if things are so bad, we got to blow up the system and we'll make it better. That was the strategy in the past election, and that's what we got. I don't want to blow up the system to make it better because I don't have any confidence that we're going to make it better by blowing it up. And I'm concerned, for example, about the gun lobby putting in provisions to protect guns in the state of New York. Don't you think they'll be actively involved in doing that? They're a very effective lobby. We have protections against that in New York State, and it would be very good not to lose that. So I think it's important to whether we are sort of going with our heart and what we think we can maybe do, right, when we're prepared to risk a lot. or whether we can focus in on concrete changes that we can make a systemic structural change. All right? Public financing of elections, systematic redistricting they are systemic social changes of profound significance. All right? You don't need a constitutional amendment for that. You need effective political organizing. That's what we're committed to doing.
Excuse me, is this the process when we go up and speak and have a question, are we going to be counted by every speaker? Is that how it's going to work when we do this?
Well, we didn't counter you because you just made a statement. I really didn't counter him either. I hardly counted him either. I just thought that you wanted to make your statement, you make your statement. So I offered an alternative.
Right to address.
But
I'd like to hear them speak.
But go ahead.
Okay, I speak as a union member for many years in the teaching profession, and I believe with Dr. Sprintzen that this is a terrible time to put this up right now, because not only are we facing a calamity here with what's going on, but also in June, the Janus decision is going to come down 5-4, that the First Amendment is going to block the mandatory collection of union dues. And what that's going to do is that's going to weaken unions guaranteed even further in June. So if we roll the dice again with the Constitution, which, by the way, internal polls show that if a vote comes up to cut pensions, maybe 20 to 30%, the majority of New York State residents would vote for it. That is the reality. You wished you lived in a society where people understood power dynamics is the way you get things, not meritocracy, not some fantasy of electoral policy. It's power dynamics. And when you decrease the power of unions, which you have since basically the 50s, from density of like 35% to 7%, this is the environment that you're going into. This is why we got Trump, because people like this, they don't feel a connection to a delivery system in the political realm at all, which is why they're confused by media and this, that, and the other. So if you had straight line votes on things like Social Security cuts, people might even vote for that right now. You're at that state. That's why it's absurd to put up a constitution where you got so many protections in New York State, which other states don't have, like the funding for the poor, guaranteed housing, and so forth. That is going to go up in a package, and I guarantee you, you're not going to know how that's going to come out, and it's absurd to risk what you already have. So I agree with Dr. Sprintzen, basically. If there are particular issues that you want to mobilize against, yes. But, don't come back to me with a constitution unless you show me a graph where participation in the political system is gone from like 20 to 70. And you know what? That's what you need to sit down and work on. That's the number one problem. I don't know what it is in terms of what you're going to do to get from like 20 to 70% voting. I don't know if it's a disincentive system where people, if they don't vote, they're fined, or if they don't vote, they don't get a right to benefits. But unless you move the graph way up, you're going to get these distorted results, because when you go and ask the people what they want nationally, there's really a consensus on most of these issues. But the reason you don't get it is because the participation is way low, and that's because of the structural corruption. And I don't see any way that a constitution is going to do that, because the numbers are just way too low. I think you're going to have to come up with a structural disincentive system against the disenfranchisement of people, so you're going to have real numbers. So let's say, for example, if you don't get a certain percentage of voting numbers in the state, then certain benefits to certain people are lost. And this is the way it should run at the federal level. So when Alabama gets 35% of the people voting, great, guys, you did a wonderful job. You just lost 4 military bases. That's what you need to do, otherwise it stops. But putting it up to a constitution without changing any of those things would just get you more of the same at a very expensive price. Thank you very much.
I just want to briefly address those points that you've made. Again, I go back to the premise that we are arguing that you shouldn't try to fix a broken system because the system is broken. All the protections, or at least most of the protections that people are referring to tonight, came from previous Constitution conventions. In fact, actually, they've done studies on it, and protections have never been lost from Constitution conventions. They've actually only been gained. When it comes to increasing voter turnout, awesome, I'm all for it. But right now, there's really not many ways to do that. One, Constitution Convention can make at least voting easier. New York has some of the worst voting laws in the country. It's so bad that certain southern states have justifyingly used that, why are you guys coming after us when New York has just as bad laws when it comes to suppressing voters? Okay, so that's voting suppression at its worst, and yet we're progressives and we're supposed to be fighting against that. I don't see how incumbents would ever want the turnout to change. Even in the '67 convention, when they studied the convention, what you saw were delegates who were much more independent because of just basic logic, and that is they're not running for re-election. So you had judges, you had former retired politicians. They had a little more autonomy and didn't care about what happened the next day. Right now, the incumbents want low turnout. They want to keep it that way. I'm totally for more people voting. Again, when it comes to the Constitution, I again don't see how in New York, with the union protections, for instance, we're number one in union members, by far. 24% of New Yorkers are union members, okay? And whether we like it or not, pensions are going downhill in a lot of ways regardless. Okay, they're now up to tier 5 or 6. All it takes is another economic recession, and we may see even weaker pensions, okay? And unions, yes, there have been a lot of, people fighting against unions over the years, but unions, I think, have themselves to blame in some ways. I mean, almost half of union membership households voted for Donald Trump. Okay, that's coming from unions.
That's what I mean, so why trust them to
Well-
roll the dice with something like this?
Well, the thing is, right, when it comes to the unions, the rank and file, if we don't try something different, it's just going to get worse and worse, right? And they're-
How do you know that if you try something different, it's not going to get worse?
What do you mean?
I mean, the point is that there are changes being made. We're trying to make changes.
Right, but
When you use the example of past constitutions, the one that made the progressive changes was in the height of the New Deal. It was a different political time. It was a different political time. Okay, let him go. All right, Joe, let's stop and go ahead. Go, you go ahead, speak. Good.
I have two quick questions and one that takes slightly more explaining. First, points of clarification. It was brought up that there are legislative issues and constitutional issues. Could we get a differentiation of what each of those are from both of you? Knowing who is for and against CONCON in terms of organizational support, and you mentioned that I believe it was gun rights advocates are pro-CONCON. Actually, the NRA is against CONCON really strenuously.
I didn't say that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have misconstrued the gun
Right,
support
right.
people. My bad, but the NRA is pro-CONCON. As is, back to the question though, both Planned Parenthood and Right to Life are really strenuously anti-CONCON. Wonder what your thoughts on that would be. And my last question, which is a slightly longer one, so sorry. Why would our current legislators, understanding that incumbents do end up being, it's sort of like convicted, dead, or maybe voted out, but most likely the first two, why would our state legislators ever want to pass something to expand separate question. Why would they want to expand voting access? So longer voting, early voting, no fault absentee voting, because we know that low turnout favors incumbents. I've actually worked on a number of campaigns. I actually worked for Working Families as a canvas director. Was on Christine Pellegrino's race, GOT coordinator. We know that very often it works for elections depending on which area you're in, whether it's blue or red, who's running. We know that low turnout is something that a lot of people bet on. That's how you can do your math.
That's how Christine won. That's how Christine won, the low turnout. It was good. I mean, fine.
I mean, I know,
Yeah.
I worked, I remember.
I mean, the point, but you asked a question, let's turn
Sorry,
around.
I
Your question is, how did it ever happen then you got better voting, same day voting? How did that ever happen? How did women ever get the right to vote in the first place? Right? I mean, why would men ever give them the right to vote? The point is, if you do, I'm responding to your question. If you do, how do you make those changes? How did you get the legislators now to approve a constitutional amendment to take pensions away from corrupted and convicted officials? You did it by political organizing and mobilizing the public so as to force them to do it. That's the answer to your question. Yes, we got to make those changes. And Citizen Action, the Working Families Party, progressive movements here and elsewhere have been organizing and mobilizing to do that. Get involved and do that and help it happen. Right? But it has happened. That's how you got things such as same-day registration. Right? Same-day registration in some states. That's how you got all these things, and we need to get them. Absolutely. Right? And it's a matter of legislation. It's not a matter of constitutional amendment. It could be in a constitution to demand it, but you don't write all your legislation in the constitutions. That becomes rigid. So constitutions set guidelines and frameworks, right? But the legislation is really done, on a year-to-year basis. And yes, we should do all those things. I'm in favor of them. We're moving and organizing for them. I'm glad to work with it. And we work very closely to support Christine Pellegrino. She had the Working Families Party line. And I expect she'll have it again. I wish she was doing a little more now, but let's won't push that point.
Sorry. That was too long.
My name is Cindy Feldman, and I was the vice president of the Plainview Congress of Teachers, which is a union. Hey. And I was the one who stood in front of the buses and stopped the buses when they needed to be stopped so we would have a contract. It concerns me that there are people here who are progressive, who thinks unions are something else. It concerns me that if we had this constitutional convention, I could lose part of my pension. Maybe New York State would decide to tax it. I'd wind up in the social service building. I'd wind up having to get money because all the years I worked, I had very little money. I did it because I loved the children. I thought I could make a difference. And it really concerns me that you would think the union is something other than me.
If I could address that. What concerns me is that 76% of people in New York are not actually members of unions. What concerns me is that unions basically were full support of the Dakota Access Pipeline. What concerns me is that unions have not critiqued people like Mayor de Blasio and Mayor Emanuel in Chicago, but actually supported their reelection bids, yet they have systemic racist policies. So I'm all for unions in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day... De Blasio
has racist policies?
Of course he is racist.
Tell his wife that.
What?
Tell his wife that.
The idea that a person, simply because his wife is African American, somehow exempts them from racism, it's not an actual acceptable reason.
Is that why the vast majority of African Americans in New York City and Hispanics vote for de Blasio?
Hillary Clinton. The African American majority voted for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. So I gotta say, I'm disappointed.
Do you know that he supports openly broken windows policy multiple times?
I'm in favor of the broken windows policy, but that's not the point. I mean, I'm surprised and disappointed that that aspect of the Bernie movement, and I've been a supporter of Bernie Sanders for 35 years. I mean, in fact, he was our proposed candidate to honor him several years ago, long before most people didn't even hear him. And I've been on conference calls with him for many times. I mean, I'm so sad that you're taking what I think is the Green Party line, which is destructive of the progressive movement. And that's unfortunate. Bernie does not take that position. Bernie does not take that position. All right, that's important to know.
In fact, the Democratic Party called him divisive for running a primary against Hillary Clinton.
The Democratic Party didn't do that. That's another ideological thing. There are people in the party who did, and there are people in the party who supported them.
You just said the Green Party.
Yes.
Can I just finish?
Yes.
I believe that we can have amendments like the two that are on there. We can work in a positive way through the legislature. Yes. Is it corrupt? Sure it is. Shouldn't it change? Yes, it should. But again, I am concerned about me. I am concerned about all the other things that could be brought up, and it's a personal thing, but I'm most concerned about the unions and the work that I did that somehow isn't recognized here.
I think that fusion voting is a way to support the two-party system. I know in the Working Families Party and in other states that they come out and they support the major candidates. It makes you feel good about voting for a Democrat or a Republican. So it props up the two-party system. When most people are getting disgusted, it's really a one-party system that we have here. And the kind of stuff, you'll never get any reform out of this so-called progressive movement and their supporters. Like, take financial reform. I was all gung-ho for it. I was out there at the Oktoberfest getting signatures for it several years ago, and then it came up again, and I was all gung-ho for it until I read the bill. The bill was written by Democrats and Republicans for the benefits of Democrats and Republicans. It froze out third parties. You know, it gave people, it just multiplied the amount of money they raised, you know, so the Democrats would get 10 times more money than, 100 times more money than a third party candidate who couldn't raise much. So it's a phony deal. You know, like we live in the age of deception here. You know, you pretend to be a progressive, and you're progressive on many things, but when it gets down to changing the system, the people in power say, the system is rotten, but I know how to play the system. I got my piece of the pie. I want to keep it. And that's why the establishment is dead set against this. And so I say that this is a chance to stop this politics as usual policy, which is getting us nowhere. Thanks.
Let me just make two very brief points so we can get away from the ideology and get to the details. Number one is, if you paid attention the other day, there was a big vote in the Congress, right? It was Mike Pence's vote, broke the tie, 51-50, right? In which the Senate voted to take away the right of individuals, right, to run a class action suit against the banks, and it gives the banks carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to you, and you can't do anything about it, right? That vote, right, had 48 out of 48 Democrats said no, 2 Republicans. None of these these famous ones like Corker or McCain or Susan Collins even. It was Kennedy from Louisiana and Lindsey Graham, actually. I mean, you know, but the point is, here you're talking about something that's profoundly effective to each of us and to every human being in this country, right? Makes profound differences, right? So we need to talk about this ideology, you know, about what it's in the world. And secondly, very simply, what does the LIPC stand for? I've said this for many years. It's the exact same policies of Bernie Sanders. And that it has been, it remains. That's our policy. People ask me, what do we stand for? I said, you look at Sanders' policies, that's the program of the LIPC. There is no difference whatsoever. And it involves recognizing that if you really want to make a difference, you've got to be serious about what you're doing. It's not just spewing ideology.
First off, I would like to say that there is a difference, and even if there wasn't, Bernie Sanders isn't the gatekeeper. No one is when it comes to supporting something or not supporting something. But we can go into that. And I would say it's not an ideology argument. I do want to clarify and emphasize there are people's lives that are getting destroyed day in and day out due to our prison industrial complex system, due to the fact that the real estate industry pretty much owns all of New York with both political parties. 76% again of people are not unions. Homelessness is increasing all throughout New York State. Their wages aren't going up. Private sector unions, it's decreasing.
Thank you. My name is Peter Gollin. I sort of style myself a civil libertarian. I would like to dispute this, tongue-in-cheek dispute the statement that New York is the most corrupt state, because Illinois has had 3 governors in jail for corruption at the same time. So we have a bit to catch up. But more seriously,
Fair enough. Cook County does do that.
yeah. More seriously, the argument that you made in favor of voting yes is an argument in favor of democracy. Democracy is a meaningful process, but it's also a catchword. Democracy requires an informed electorate. I think that what we had 50 years ago might well have been an informed electorate. I doubt that we have it now. I think if you remember watching TV 50 years ago, you had Walter Cronkite, and he would cut away for news, and you'd have about a 2-minute segment from one of the candidates who was campaigning for a high office, and then you'd have another 2-minute segment from the opponent, and you'd have some discussion. Now you have about 10-second sound bites. So the transfer of information to people is much reduced. When they get information, they get it typically from the website or websites that they already agree with. So there's not as much exposure to multiple ways of thinking anymore. Critical thinking is down. And I think that if you had an election based, and your goal is a democratic change, you may be deceiving yourself. We don't have the same informed electorate that can ponder issues critically and come to an informed judgment. And so I dispute the fact that democracy demands that we vote yes.
So, just so we're clear on this, again, the system is broken.
Yes.
And to fix a broken system is going to take
take
trust. But going beyond that, I want to talk about the critical thinking. Women didn't have the right to vote at one point. Segregation used to exist. Slavery used to exist, okay? The idea that there was some magically more informed electorate. Even when it comes to voting turnout, it wasn't the case. Where it was so, yes, I agree that information is coming in different forms and stuff like that. But the idea that, in 1967 or 1938, there was some huge difference, come on, people know the candidates that ran, right? Like, we know that Nixon was president for 8 years in Vietnam, and we know that FDR was called like a socialist and was pretty much hated by a lot of America and was completely radical, and that there was a very famous priest in America that, supported Nazism at its finest. So this idea that, like, democracy is messy and we shouldn't trust democracy, that's always been the case in everything. Oftentimes people, when given the circumstances, will do the right thing, and that's the risk involved in every election, Look, Trump was elected, and all the bad things that are happening, but we're going to fight back like we always do. The world doesn't stop spinning just because Trump was elected. In 2020, hopefully, we'll fight back and win back the White House.
Well, as a union member and a person with a pension, retired, I would be in the same boat if that goes. And I'll go on social service, and everyone will pay for it. The problem that I see with your argument, first of all, you're wrong about FDR. I've studied FDR for 20 years, and what you just said was inaccurate.
Which part?
That people hated him. If you want to find out, just look at this. Wait a minute. I'm talking now, okay? I'm speaking. So you give me the courtesy. I sat there in the chair and I listened. But when you go after Franklin Roosevelt, that really bothers me. Because there were tons of letters that went to the White House supporting him. And people put his picture up in their homes. You know why? Because he was the only one who turned around and said there's nothing to fear but fear itself. But he also had something else that he did. He was a smart enough politician to work the time. Was he perfect? No. He was not perfect. But it was not a perfect time. So while I listen to everything you say, the problem that I have with your argument is very simple. You're telling me that a constitutional convention, philosophically, is going to fix everything. And you know what? After being in a union, and being a member of a police department, and being a member of a park service as a park ranger, and serving the public, I can tell you that doesn't work. What works is getting in the trenches and fighting every single day. And that's what works. And furthermore, we could open the door. We already have a white supremacist in the White House. We're on the verge of what God knows what with North Korea. And we open the door here and we say, come on in, everybody. And what's going to happen when we open the door? The same thing that always happens in this country. The big money is going to come in. And then the little voices, you and I and the rest of us, are going to get drowned out. So my feeling is, I'd love to see changes. I want to see a lot of changes, but I don't want to open the door to dangerous people that are already doing dangerous things. Thank you.
Very much. So, he's not attacking FDR. FDR did get a lot of backlash when he ran. He was called a socialist, a communist. In fact, no Republican actually voted for. He was elected 3 times. The people voted
4 times.
for him 4 times. But he did get a lot of backlash, even when it came to the New Deal and everything. But going beyond that, again, the idea was an informed electorate. Like, people, there are a lot of people that we voted for over the years in the 1900s, the 1930s, 1960s, and so on. Now, when it comes to the in the trenches and somehow weird attack on my character, I am in the trenches. I do community organizing for a living. I do this day in and day out. And I can tell you that Southeast Queens and East New York doesn't look in the best of shape and haven't for decades. So when people tell me about their pensions, I tell them, well, what about the rest of people? What about people in East New York? Don't they matter? Or in Brownsville? Or in certain parts of Suffolk County? There are places in Suffolk County. There are haves and have-nots everywhere throughout New York. So, you know, again, that's my count there. It's not philosophical. There's empirical evidence and scholars behind it to show that a lot of this stuff.
Let's go.
Go ahead, say something.
My name is John Bush, and I am not a progressive, but I live in New York State, and I recognize New York State as a progressive state, and I benefit from some of the things that the progressives do. It seems to me that the argument against the Constitutional Convention is, hey, I like the golden egg that I got, and I don't trust the voters. And I just think that's wrong, and you made a good point. Democracy, and by the way, FDR is my personal hero, even though I'm conservative. The whole argument is democracy, it is sloppy, and it is dirty, and you get good people and you get bad people. But I can't see somebody, well, don't touch this, I've got this benefit, don't you dare touch it. I don't trust the voters. This state is a corrupt state, and it's true, Illinois, although there's also Louisiana. I think Louisiana is actually number one. The argument of Louisiana was all the good politicians end up in jail. But I just think, and this is, I came here not really having an opinion. Now I'm going to vote for having it. Because I just think you have to trust the voters. Yes, not everybody votes. Yes, a lot of people are stupid. Winston Churchill once said the biggest argument against democracy is a 5-minute discussion with any citizen. But look at the people in this room. I mean, I probably disagree with 99% of you, but you do know what's going on. Most of the people I know what's going on. And I just think you've got to, at some point, say, you know what? It's not working well now. We got to do something, and trusting the voters is not a bad way to go forward. That's just my view.
Well, it's, you were saying?
Just one thing. I think there's a progressive speaker, the gentleman, David?
Yes, right, yeah.
Michael, I think your mistake is you shouldn't really divide the unions from the rest of the progressive movement. We only win when we're tied together. That's, don't give us this privilege, well, you're privileged. That's the divide and conquer strategy that Trump is using right now. You don't want to bring that over to the conservative. We have to unite all factions, so don't divide East New York and other people. That's ridiculous. We have to come together as a progressive movement. Like David said, that's the way we're going to be successful on any issue. Not of things like, oh, well, unions are declining anyway. One of the main reasons why the United States has declined as a welfare state is because unions have declined. You go measure Canada against the United States and see why they have held on to things and we have not, is because their unions have held intact. It's called power dynamics. That's how things are determined. So when you diminish an oppositional power, a little, physics here, it's going to push on the other side. Yes, there are people who are corrupt, and yes, there are people who don't know what's going on, but when you take away a power position from one side and you diminish it,
The other side, like water, is going to come rushing in. So I don't know why you're thinking as a progressive like unions are in decline anyway. That's the wrong way to go. What you need to be thinking is building up the power base and bringing people along together. That's the way you're going to make a difference, not by pitting one faction against the other, which you're seeing right now at the national level. How about this vote today about the taxes, all right? That's totally ridiculous, okay? So what is that? That's conservative states ruling over the majority of the other states who actually have the money to fund the government, but they're using it politically. Raw power, 216, 212, look at it today. That's what we're going to get with the Constitutional Convention.
If I could just briefly address that. We're not trying to be divisive. What we often hear is whenever we disagree with unions on this or that, we're being divisive. And we have to get in line. But whenever we reverse it, it's like, well, you guys should agree with us. No. So they can patronize down to me, or say that the electorate's uninformed, or say we're naive idealists, or basically say the Green Party's the worst in the world, and that's not divisive. But when it comes to supporting unions, you got to be 100%, even if you disagree on this endorsement or that endorsement, because it's divisive. And to me, it's just, it's unfair. We have a right to disagree. The Democratic and Republican Party often do this, where anyone who tries to run an election or has a different opinion, they say they're being divisive. We have a right to disagree.
Yeah. So let me speak to you on this, because I think there's some very important undertone here, which really needs to be just appreciated. Right? It's a very different conception of politics that's at stake here, which I think, and the Green Party is a good example of it. I'm not against being divisive if it's appropriate to divide, and I certainly want to divide against the Trumps, for example. You had this vote you referred to. I mean, it's easy for the radical leftists, right, to deride the Democratic Party, and we can be very critical of it. But what was that vote on the tax giveaway? In fact, I think every Democrat in the House of Representatives voted opposed to it. That's kind of impressive, right? Sure. I mean, on every one of those healthcare votes in the Senate, every Democrat, including Joe Manchin from very conservative West Virginia, which Trump carried by 30%, right? Voted. Right? So the parties, there is significant difference here. It's not a one-party state. Right? And the Democratic Party itself is not univocal. To say the Democratic Party, right? You talk as if somehow it's some kind of univocal thing, right? Bernie Sanders worked with many people in the Democratic Party. He got a lot of support. Keith Ellison came close to gaining control, being elected. He was defeated. Right? I would have liked him to be successful, right? But that kind of thinking is really kind of. It's not that it's divisive, it's that it's destructive of progressive opportunities and possibilities. How do you make a really effective progressive movement, right? You don't run around the state like the Green Party does and Howard Hawkins does and says the greatest, best program. His program is always the best. I absolutely agree, and I've discussed this with him. Absolutely the best. Right? But he absolutely refuses to make cause with other progressive movements in the state because they take money from corporations, right? And what does he do? He runs candidates, right, to undermine the capacity of getting progressive Democrats in the state Senate. It's the exact same thing the Liberal Party used to do. It's precisely one of the reasons why we created the Working Families Party in the first place, right? Because the Liberal Party, which ultimately ended up on the payroll of the Republicans, only functioned to destroy the capacity of progressive Democrats. They always ran the best progressive candidate in principle, right? And that's what Howard Hawkins does. That's what the Green Party does. Am I opposed to the Green Party? Not in Germany. I think they do a very fine job, right? Because they're prepared to make common cause, right? With whom? The Social Democrats in Germany. Are they the best party in the world? No. And I wish they'd make common cause with Die Linke sometimes in Germany. But they don't do that, right? But they're willing to engage in a political process to build an effective progressive movement. And there is no effective progressive movement without the labor movement, without organized labor. Do we always agree with organized organized labor? Absurd not. We've been engaged in disagreements and arguments and opposition with them on questions having to do with a whole series of environmental questions, questions with respect to expansion of roadways. We stopped that. We stopped the expansion of roadways on Long Island. They wanted, and the unions wanted to build all those roadways. I mean, there are numerous issues that you can have disagreements with, and perfectly legitimate. How do you work cooperatively with a group that you have disagreements with? How do you be respectful? That's a challenge, right? So I'm prepared to work with you because even though I disagree with the kind of politics, but I certainly support the Bernie movement, right? Because Bernie Sanders is promoting the policies of the progressive movement, and that's something we've been doing for 38 years now, right? And the policies are almost identical to Bernie's. Right? So, what I want to talk about is the way you understand politics and how we engage in what it means to really build a progressive movement. Right? That's why we created on Long Island a progressive network of all the progressive organizations that wanted to be part of it. Unfortunately, the Green Party is not part of that, but that's not unusual. Right? It meant to try and coordinate, and that doesn't mean we agree on all these different things. We disagree on a lot of different things. So it's a very complicated issue, right? Well, we really have, unfortunately, we have to be out of here at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, can I
So-
want to,
So,
David.
So, why don't you
No,
get
David,
the,
you have,
let
it has
the,
to be
let the women
refuted what
behind
you've been
you, 'cause
saying.
she hasn't spoken.
No, this has to be said. She
The
agrees
woman-
with me. It has to be said.
Well,
But
let
you
her
said
say it, then
something.
let her say it
You
if she's
said
been
something
sure.
that's completely untrue, so it has to be said. Because I was active with the Long Island Progressive Coalition. I was active with its initial board, and I was active.
not
I was
on
at-
its board.
What, it was a committee, whatever. It wasn't a board at the time.
never on
You
its board.
conveniently forget certain things. It's not that the Green Party hasn't wanted to be involved. I'm not a Green. I'm a Democrat. Hasn't wanted to be involved. It's that the Long Island Progressive Coalition is so tied in with the Working Families Party that they don't want Greens or anybody who challenges the status quo as part of it. And by the way, the Working Families Party is moving in the direction of the Liberal Party of the past. But that's not what I wanted to talk about.
both
I want to
are
say
false.
something else, because this is a definite issue. No, I want to say something, David.
No, you bring an anger here which I don't like. I
And you
wanna
knock
talk-
everybody who
No.
disagrees with you and always have.
We can disagree. I don't mind disagreeing. We disagree. I respect the disagreement. I tried to talk about the difference in politics here. I didn't attack him personally. I didn't say he was an evil person at all. And I'm committed. That's not it. I disagree with Alice's policies. And that's important.
Okay, can I
all right.
speak before 9
So
o'clock?
if you want to say something.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Please let her speak.
Okay. Hi, my name is Gail Payne, and I am with the Green Party. And I feel like you're incredibly attacking the Green Party.
I am.
And we are tiny, although we did get more votes in the last, I think it was the presidential election.
No,
Slightly
gubernatorial
more
election.
than the working
Gubernatorial
class.
election. You got more votes in the
Oh.
gubernatorial election.
Okay. But anyway, there's
We knew
something
that was gonna happen.
there's something called ranked choice voting.
Yes,
They have it
I support
in
it.
some countries in Europe.
I support it.
That is the simple solution. We need to get much more than just the Republicans and the Democratic parties. I agree with Terry, who said that the parties are, in many ways, the same. They don't want change, except for social issues, women's issues. Wall Street, environment. Democrats think they're better in the environment, that they've moved way too slowly as far as climate change. Wall Street, the environment, GMOs, there's so many other ways the same. So the Green Party is growing. A lot of people are switching over, despite the media. And I feel like the dissing of the Green Party is not helpful.
Well, I
Talk
think
about
it is,
ranked
but I
ranked choice
disagree.
voting. You
I
didn't even
disagree.
mention ranked choice voting.
Huh? I'm in favor of ranked choice voting. I have no problem with that. I've been a
Okay,
member of
but you
that.
didn't
I've been
mention
working-
it. Instead, you're just criticizing the Green Party, who has so little power.
No, I
So-
criticize their policies and programs, and I've
Their
argued this with Howard
policies?
Hawkins. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, everybody go online if you have
I
time
don't mean,
and
I don't
check
mean
their
I don't mean
policies.
their platform, their program. I'm talking about how they implement it and how destructive it is. I mean, they
have
talk
no
about
money.
fracking,
They have
but
no
they
money.
have nothing to do with getting fracking in New York State because they're impotent.
David,
but we
they're
had a lot to do with
tiny
getting
and
fracking.
they don't have a lot of power.
That's
You're
right.
They're
That's
not.
right.
They're
And
not
they
like
use-
Europe.
That's it, because they don't build power.
So rather than
All
diss
right,
them,
so-
why don't you say you want them to grow?
No,
you don't
because
welcome.
they're destructive.
They're
I explained to
destructive?
you why, Gail, I explained to you why they're destructive. The Kaminsky race, for example, for state
I don't
senate.
know that race.
I'm trying to give you examples.
Okay.
And it's not an ideological thing. I love the Green Party in France. I loved Cécile Duflot. right? I'm glad she
Okay.
was in the ministry. So
In
it's,
90 seconds, we have to go.
I don't really have
Yeah,
anything
I'd
else
like
to
so
say.
that's not a, it's not a, you know.
Okay.
I'd like to make one comment, sir. You mentioned a decline into the welfare state. I
Decline
think
into
that
welfare
you
state.
look at the Europeans, the Western European countries essentially, they are welfare states. They have risen to be welfare states. They take care of their people. I don't know what, but if you say decline to the welfare state, I think
We were
that's-
taxing in 1955, Republicans and Democrats at the federal level agreed to tax wealthy people at 90%. And unions were at 35%. That's why that happened.
Well, I
Now
think-
we're at 7 and
You
you see
misinterpreted
what's
what he
going
said.
on.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't talking about Europe, he was talking about America.
I'm
Yeah,
talking about
okay.
America welfare
Yeah.
state decline.
Well, it's just
tied in with
the
union
term.
density.
Yeah, okay, the term. I love the welfare state because I have my idea of the welfare state. Okay, good. Listen, it's been a great knockdown, drag out evening. I think we have to really say people are well informed. Both speakers were excellent. It was